seen as this has been kind of rotating. Just to confirm, you're seeing my screen?
Yes,
Yeah,
we can.
thank you, Sean. Okay, so as you can see, we auto record, so recording kicks off right away. We trim the beginning part, and we won't kick off until probably about now. And but just know that these are recorded. So if you are participating in the call in any way, shape, or form, it is being recorded. We post that on the Doug channel, just so you're aware. As noted here, these calls are all about interaction and engagement, right? The whole purpose of a user group is to connect people, quite literally friends with people all over the world because of engaging in these calls. Apparently, I don't know how to use PowerPoint, so that's challenging, but we'll not worry about that. Hold on, can I pause it? There. Okay, so no, never mind, I lost that battle too. So please engage on that note. So please engage through the presentation. If you have comments, chat items, please submit them. Use the chat. Throw your LinkedIn connection details in there so people can connect with you. Any chatter about features and functions that you're seeing and you want to add commentary, please do in there. That's awesome. That is, again, the whole purpose of why we're here, right? Is to foster that community, sense of community. So please do so as you go through. One of the slides you would have seen is an upcoming set of speakers. So you can see we've got the next 4 or 5 booked out, which is awesome. So the coordination team's been working hard to secure some great content. So we've got some really good ones. And we've, in fact, even got other people like Sean, who you see on camera in front of his green screen, who's got a fantastic presentation. We're just trying to figure out where the heck can we fit it in. So that's very exciting. We've got some great content, really looking forward to some of the things. And we're trying to branch a little bit outside of just the Dynamics 365 CE or CRM stuff, where our next one is going to be today, for example. Taylor's going to talk us through beginning tips on some of the Power Platform, Power Apps pieces. And we also want to look at, next one is on leadership and emerging leaders, and how do we foster leadership in people in our companies and our colleagues, which is really exciting to me. So lots of cool things, but then also getting into things like XRM Toolbox, which most of you probably know, but if you don't, join Ashley's session in April, I think, where, yeah, April 11th, there it is right there. And she's going to show you about a number of tips and tricks that exist in the toolbox. If you're not familiar with what that is, please join that one, because it's an amazing resource for you. So lots of good stuff coming up. If you have ideas, if you have things that you'd like to participate, I will, when I stop yapping here, throw in the chat a survey link, that one right there, that you can click on. Feel free to submit ideas, whether it's things you want to see or things you'd like to present. We would welcome either or any and all ideas, particularly those of you who'd like to speak. We'd really love to hear from you, because if you've never spoken before, or you'd like to, or you have spoken lots and you want to do it again, please let us know. If you've never talked before and you're like, oh, that sounds neat, but I don't even know where to begin, please send in a response to that. I would love to talk to you. Let's do a joint session on something. Let's, even if we're like, hey, let's only do a 40-minute presentation. You just want to talk for 10 minutes, but you just want to get a feel for what it's like. Please, please submit something. We would love to support and foster that in you, because the community, and Liz can attest to this, is always looking for speakers and participants to step up and contribute their ideas. And no matter what you're sharing, I guarantee it is of value to somebody out there in the world. So please, if you're not comfortable speaking, still reach out. We'd love to talk to you about how can we support you in that. So all that said, I will turn it over to Liz Halen, who is going to talk us through, I'm sorry, Liz, I think I just said your last name wrong, Liz Hallen. And Liz is going to talk us through all the wonderful offerings that Doug has. And so I will stop sharing so that Liz can share.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Malcolm. And yes, it is Liz Hallen, but that's okay. It gets pronounced as Halen all the time, but that's okay too. I've been called way worse, so it's all good. So thank you all so much for being here. As Malcolm said, we're super excited to have you on the February version of the Canadian Doug user group, specific for our CRM CE folks. If you've not heard of Doug, which is short for Dynamics User Group, I just wanted to give you a quick rundown of who we are, what we do, and some new exciting things that are coming. So we've been around for a little while, but we are a community that supports the Dynamics 365 products, all of them, as well as Dynamics GP and the Power Platform. We've been around with full-time staff now for the last about 4 years, and we are very excited to say that we are inching oh so closely to having 43,000 members worldwide. Our membership is free, and it's for each of you as an individual. Because we are true believers in the power of community, in offering education, training, and networking to help each of you evolve and transpire into amazing humans, as well as excel in your career. So as Malcolm kind of mentioned earlier, like the power of community is truly powerful. And many of us have started our careers with community, and I've watched so many people grow in themselves and in their career with the power of community. So that is why Doug is here, to help you do those things. So in addition to meetups like what you are involved in today, we have online discussion forums where you can ask quick questions and get subject matter expert responses. We have free educational webinars, which you can also find if you miss them. They're on demand on our Meetup, sorry, not our Meetup, on our YouTube channel. Kind of jumping around a little bit here. Our YouTube channel has almost 700 videos. The recordings from meetups like you're on today. So all of our virtual events, we often record during meetups. Our webinars are there. All of the sessions that we've hosted for the last 4 DynamicsCon live conference or DynamicsCon virtual conferences are also there. Again, another excellent resource for you to get some really great education and training on the dynamics and power, basically all the business applications. In addition to that, we've got a Team Up Partner Member Program that gives some of our partners and ISVs in the community a little bit more visibility. But if you're a customer in the space, it's a great place for you to go and find ISVs and partners to help extend and make your current implementation even more efficient and successful. We also have a Skill Up on-demand training program, which does have classes. We do have a couple of free ones on there, but this would be one of the programs that does have a fee associated with that, and that is because we like to pay our trainers. So our trainers that are in this space do this for a living, and so we want to compensate them for that. But for the most part, all of the other resources you see here are free to attend, free to participate in. The only other one that is not is our DynamicsCon Live conference. So Doug is the host of DynamicsCon Live. We're coming to Denver, Colorado in the US here on May 13th through the 16th. We're anticipating about 2,000 community members at this event. We're seeing huge growth numbers over last year. We will have about 250 sessions for you to consume over the course of those 3 days across all of the products that you see there on the left. Our agenda is now available, so if you want to see what we are, what you can gather there, please check out the website at live.dynamicscon.com. And I do have a special promo code for all of you here today. If you would like 15% off of your registration, you've got the Meetup 15 there. And we did have a price increase on February 1, but that promo code will still work. If going to Europe, or if you're more European based and can't make it to DynamicsCon Live, we do have a really great partnership with the Dynamics Minds Conference. This is an event that is also being hosted in May, but it's in Slovenia in Europe. So this is not our event. This is not our conference. We just have a really great partnership with them. And they are hosting their second event in Slovenia, which I heard that I wasn't at the first one, but I heard it was an absolute blast. So they will be in Slovenia the end of May. And if traveling is not in your team's budget, we welcome you to join us for DynamicsCon Virtual. I see some familiar names on here of people that have spoken at our virtual event. We will be opening our session submission process in April of this year. So keep your eyes peeled for those dates, because we take a period of time where we accept session submissions, and then we will turn all of those over to the community, allow the community to vote on those submissions. The top voted sessions are the ones that you will see on our agenda in the middle of November at the end of the year. So It is truly content that is selected by you as the community members. That is my spiel. Thank you so much, Malcolm, for having me. I'm excited to hear what Taylor has to say. I have to admit, I've got another call here in a little bit, so I'll have to watch the recording, but we'll turn it back over to you, Malcolm.
Awesome. Well, thank you for that, Liz. It's super exciting to see the growth that you guys are going through, and I'm really excited to be heading to Denver in May. So, admittedly, thought it was March for some reason. So the other day on the call, I was like, "Why does Denise keep saying May? Why do they have the date wrong?" And then it turned out it was me who had the date wrong. So I'm glad I hadn't already booked my trip and everything. So that would have been super embarrassing. So looking forward to that. So thank you for that, Liz. Understand that you have your call. So we are then going to pivot over to Taylor. So Taylor is joining us. And Taylor, you have, if I recall correctly, you did a keynote at one of the Doug events a couple of years ago. Did you not? Is that correct?
Yes, I did. I can kind of get the timeline all mixed up, but yes, I did. And Liz may know more of the details than I do, but
I'm March of 22.
Was it the keynote for the virtual event?
It was. Yep.
Gotcha. Yeah. And I think I also did Power App session. Yeah, I think I also did the Power App session that year for virtual. But yeah, that was actually, I think, my first Power App session. So it's cool that it was with you guys, because I've been at every DynamicsCon live event, which I'm pretty happy with. Last year, I was happy to win the Community Superhero Award for diversity and inclusion. Because while I am here today to talk to you all about Power Apps, accessibility is a big passion of mine. I do suffer from a disability, and I'm very compassionate. And so I love to help others, and regardless of their background or what they're going through. So I'm a huge advocate for that. And so I actually have 2 sessions at DynamicsCon Live in Denver. One will be on Power Apps. It will be fairly similar to this today, but I always switch things up. So if you want to come to that as well, you're most likely going to see some different stuff. But I also have a session on how ChatGPT can empower people with trying to learn about accessibility and utilize it, and just how AI can help people with accessibility needs, and not only help people who have disabilities, but also people who want to learn more and want to help. And so I'm excited to do both of those, and I may submit some sessions for virtual. We'll see. I feel like could use a little break from the speaking, although I do enjoy it, but it can get a little cumbersome because I try to keep a mental calendar as much as I can, because I'm not the best at using my Outlook calendar, but a lot of people have been telling me I need to get better at that. So that's why I was fairly confident that today's scheduling issue was on my end, but I think it just got lost in the shuffling. But either way, we're here, so happy to be here, and glad that Liz was saying all of that about the community, because it's fantastic community to be a part of, incredibly supportive. And if you've never spoken, it's a great conference to do your first time at, because again, the community will rally behind you, and it's just a fantastic event all around. So hopefully you can come to that or attend the virtual one. Either way, I'm glad to be here today talking to you all.
Well, Taylor, you got the reins here now, so you go right ahead and dive right in, and I'm going to go on mute and off cam, and the show is all yours.
All righty. Try to make sure I'm sharing the right screen here. So can you all see my title slide here?
We can. Looks good.
Yep.
All right. Sounds good. All right. So they named my session as Top 10 Tips for Beginning Power App Citizen Developers. So these 10 tips are kind of to get you a good jumping off point, get you some tips that can help shorten that learning curve. And even if you're not necessarily a beginner, there may be some things in here you may have overlooked or forgotten or might just need a refresher. So even if you're more on the intermediate side, hopefully you can get something out of this session. And if you can leave with at least one new thing, I'll feel happy with that. But also, I just want to make it known now that I do like to have interactive sessions. So I don't know if you'll have any restrictions and want to keep people on mute, but feel free to come off to ask questions, and I'll certainly do my best to answer them. So Malcolm, you're going to be on the call the entire time, correct?
Yes, sir, I will be.
All right, so would you mind moderating chat to keep an eye out for questions?
I most certainly will.
All right, sweet. I could, but I don't want to divert my attention to do that as well. Might get a little flustered, so
I
so I
got you. We're
appreciate
good.
that. All right. So if at any point you want to put a question in chat, I'll answer it to the best of my ability, or come off mute and talk to me. Either way. All right, so go on to my next slide here. This is just a little bit more about me, some of my interests. I'm not going to go into too much detail on all of these because I could talk for a while about my interests. But some of the big ones up here, like public speaking, doing things like this, I really enjoy. I love to impart my wisdom, if you can call it that, my experiences on others, and try and help others start their journey in the Power Platform and accessibility. I'd like to be active, especially like water sports, like wakeboarding and tubing. And as you can see in the picture here, I have a blue Great Dane named Maverick, who does not like baths. And he's actually asleep on the floor behind me, so hopefully he'll behave. He's been pretty good up till this point, so hopefully that continues. And yeah, as I said, I'm not going to go into too much detail on these. But if you see anything up here you want more information about, or if you have any shared interests and want to talk about it or just want to connect, I would love to. And I'll have a slide at the end with my email on it. So if you want to get in contact, feel free to reach out. So with that, I'll get right into my first tip here. So the first one I have is UX over UI. So for anyone in here who may not know what those two acronyms are, the UX stands for user experience and UI is user interface. So, and I always think of it as functionality and design for UX and UI. So functionality over design. And I always want to emphasize both of these elements are very important to a good Power App. However, when you first get started, I feel like it's good to know that UX is certainly more important because if, for example, if you have two apps and one looks outstanding and beautiful but doesn't work, a client's not going to care if it looks good. If it doesn't perform its purpose, it's essentially worthless. So you're better off having a bare bones and not very pretty app, but making sure it works and start with that and then go back and worry about design. And over time, just like me, hopefully you'll be able to do these two in tandem, like do a little bit of functionality UX design and then do some interface design. So that's my one of my favorite tips. I usually don't start with the best, but I kind of scramble them around to keep myself on my toes. But yeah, hopefully you find that one helpful. And again, over time, you can do the both at the same time. But in the beginning, I would prioritize functionality or UX over UI. So with that, I'll go on to my next tip here. All right, so this one, I'm talking about adding data to your app. And with Power Apps, you have, last time I checked, over 400 possible connectors. And that's pretty great. I believe when I first started using Power Apps, there was around 100, 150-ish. So it's certainly, and it's getting higher and higher all the time. So it could be different now, but last I saw was around 400, a little bit more. But also an interesting thing, these connectors I put into two different categories. You have action-based connectors and data sources. So data sources are connectors that you would use to send and retrieve data. Like you would interact with that data source, like sending data, reading it, updating it, and deleting that CRUD acronym. And so examples of that would be like Excel, SharePoint, SQL Server, Dataverse. So those are data sources. And then you have action-based connectors. So these are connectors you're not going to be using to store data or manipulate data. You're going to be using these to help you carry out a function. So I feel like it'd be good to have an example. So in one app I created, I used the Outlook 365 connector, and this allowed me to send an email to the person submitting the form on submission. And I was able to do this by connecting to the Outlook 365 connector, which was linked to my email. And you're not able to do this unless you have that established connector. And also an interesting thing with it is you're not limited to just Microsoft products. You can also have third-party connectors like Salesforce, Twitter, Instagram, QuickBooks, like a lot of different things. So most likely, if you want to connect to something, there's a good chance it's already a native connector in Power Apps. And so with that, I'm going to switch over here to my Power App. And right here. So right here, I just have a demo app I created. It's actually a variation of the app I use for personal use, but this is kind of manipulated to be more of a company use, like for a company. So right here in the this middle area, this is called your canvas. So this is where you would put all your elements, your buttons, your charts, your text boxes, everything would be going on here. And so I can pop into preview mode, and I believe this is a 3-screen app. So you got a simple forum here, and then another screen that shows a gallery of all the expenses. Now, you don't need to know anything about this app. I'm just using it as a medium to teach people and just to show you what Power Apps can do. But if you have any interest in this app and want to see more behind the scenes, how the formulas work, or maybe you want to see any other apps I created, feel free to let me know at another time. We can look into that. But back to data, and if at any point anyone finds my halo right here around my cursor distracting, feel free to put it in chat and I can easily turn it off, but I find it helpful for demos. All right, so for adding data, so over here on the left side, you have the tree view, which is open by default when you open Power Apps. And this is just a list of all the elements that are in your app. And so an element is every like individual piece. So this pie chart is an element, and these icons are elements. And so they're all going to show up over here. And so to the left of that, you see these other icons. Right here underneath this plus is an icon for data. And right here, it'll show you what connectors you currently have that are connected to your app. And over here, you have the ability to refresh and remove data connectors from your app. And if you were to start an app from blank, you're not going to have anything show up here. But if you use a template from data, you're going to see whatever you connected it to over here. So as you can see, I have my SharePoint list that I'm using as my data source. And then right here is a collection. And a collection is a more advanced topic, so I'm not going to go into it at all today. But essentially, like a high overview, it's a data source that is 100% contained within your Power App. That's just a very quick way of describing it. It's a much more advanced topic, so I'm not going to get into it. But if you want to add data, you come up here to add data, and you have the ability to search for connectors. And since I already got SharePoint, I'm going to just type in SharePoint. So you click the product you want to connect to. And then right here, I'm going to have to pick a tenant. So I'll use my personal tenant. And then over here on the right-hand side, it'll give you options for SharePoint sites to use. So I'm going to use my Power App Ranger site. And then once you click your site, it then pulls up all lists you can use. And as you can see, I have quite a few. I use SharePoint quite often. So I'm just going to pick this one at the top. I'm going to Move this a lot out of the way. It's blocking the connect button. All right. So then you connect it, and you can see over here on the left-hand side, it added that SharePoint list to my connectors. And I'm going to move this meeting window back over here. Probably should have done that originally, but it's okay. And so whenever you add a new connector, you're going to see it pop up over here. And as I said, you can refresh and remove it right here. So I could leave this here, and it's not going to change anything in my app. I could have 20 different connectors over here, and it wouldn't change anything performance-based or anything, because it won't matter until you leverage this connector in a formula in your app. So I can leave this here, and that's not going to affect anything in my app, but I like to keep things organized, so I'm going to go ahead and remove it. And just like that, it pops out. All right, and is there anything else I wanted to touch on for that? I don't think so. All right, so I'll switch back over to my my slideshow, if I can see it. I probably should have cleaned up my tabs before I joined this call. There we go. And that's the edit mode. Which one is it? Apparently I have like 3 or 4 open. Probably should have cleaned that up before I got in here. All right, so those are all the connectors. And then move on to my next slide. This slide's going to be about Dataverse and why you should consider using Dataverse. And so first I want to start off with, if you're comfortable with Excel or SharePoint or whatever it may be, I recommend you use that first when you're getting started, so you can not have to worry about the data side as much. You can focus on learning Power Apps, the interface, and just how things work. And then over time, once you get more comfortable with Power Apps, I would suggest moving over to Dataverse. And I have a couple of reasons for you. And one of the biggest ones is that Dataverse is pretty much the foundation for the Power Platform. You can build your Power BI reports, your Canvas or model-driven apps, your chatbots, your flows, and your Power Pages, all built off of Dataverse. And also, one thing I find really cool about Dataverse, and out of those 400 plus connectors that the Power Platform has, Dataverse is the only one that does not use an API. And so basically what that's doing is cutting out the middleman. So instead of, like, say, SharePoint talking to an API to transfer data to my app, everything, that step is cut out because you don't need an API because it's part of the platform. And so it can cut down with performance issues if you're dealing with a lot of data. It can update data more quickly. You can update data more quickly. So there's a lot of benefits to using Dataverse. It can be a little challenging to learn at first, but again, that's why I suggest using what you know first right away. So a lot of people, even in high school, learn Excel. So if you feel more comfortable in Excel, use that first until you feel more comfortable using Dataverse. And also, something cool about Dataverse that I really enjoy using is it has the CDM, or the Common Data Model. And what this is, these are native tables that are inside of Dataverse by default. And with all these tables, they have pre-established relationships and security rules. So if you're utilizing those tables, you don't have to manually create those relationships and assign those security roles. And they have quite a few tables. I don't know the exact number of tables that are in the Common Data Model, but I highly suggest you utilize it at some point. And also, storage component, as you can see on the screen here, has terabytes of storage capability, and I believe it's around 4 terabytes per database. And I believe Dataverse is still included with a Power Apps license per user. So I believe each user, last time I checked, has around 250 megabytes of storage. But if you exceed that, I believe it moves to you pay per gig per month. And again, don't quote me on that. If you want more accurate information on pricing, I suggest looking directly at Microsoft's website. Those things can change quite often, so certainly don't take my word for it. All right, and so with that, I'm going to move on to my next slide here. And as beautifully demonstrated by Kevin from The Office here, we all make mistakes. And what's great is when you know how to fix these mistakes. And in Power you have it can be a little complicated at first, but you have a way where you can, once you get used to it, it can be a relatively easy way to fix mistakes. And so I'm going to show you how to do that. I'm going to switch over. Well, is there anything I want to talk about first here before I go show you? All right. No, so I'm going to move back over to Power Apps. All right, so let's say you make an error, like I accidentally deleted that and it got saved because Power Apps automatically saves every 2 minutes while you're editing. So say you make some mistakes and you're trying to fix it yourself, so you're not leaving the app and coming back in, whatever it may be. So like say like you have an error in your code or like you mess up something design-wise and you're like stressing out because you're not sure how to fix it. Well, luckily with Power Apps, there is a fairly easy way to revert to a previous version, which can fix this error. So right now I'm going to go ahead and publish this. And so this version now does not have my pie chart anymore. So I want to get it back. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back and leave my app. And hopefully my internet cooperates and doesn't take too long with things. All right, so when you're back at this screen, you can go to your apps. So right now I'm using my demo budgeting app. And I'll come over here to the ellipses. And then I'll go down to details. And in this details screen, there's a tab called versions. And so you click on versions. And what I like to do is immediately refresh the screen, because sometimes the top version isn't really the most recent. It may not have updated yet. So now it's updated. And so we know that this version 55 is the one without the pie chart. And so I'm going to restore version 40 or 54. So I select it, come up here to the top to restore, and then it'll ask me to confirm. So I'll restore. And remember, the latest version was 55, and now it is 56, because when you restore that, it created a brand new version, although version 56 is the exact same as 54. And so what you'll do then, you couldn't just leave and then go back to the app. Like it still wouldn't have the pie chart because you're missing one step. You have to select that newest version, then you have to publish. So come up here and then it'll open up a window over here where you can confirm. And then confirmation. All right, so now we should be able to come back over here to apps, go to my demo budgeting app, and come into it. Hopefully it doesn't take too long here. And so when this loads, we should see that pie chart back in the center of our canvas. And there we are. So I find that to be very helpful, because I certainly made loads of mistakes when I first got started, and that's totally fine. Often people learn better when they make mistakes and learn how to fix them, because there's no way you're going to start learning Power Apps and just pick up everything and not make mistakes. You're going to have mistakes. Even professionals who have been doing it for years, they're going to get error codes in their formula and not be sure how it went wrong, and so they'll just revert back to the previous version that worked and then work from there. So hopefully you find that helpful. And And if you have any questions about any of these tips, just feel free to let me know. All right, and so that was about reverting. So now we'll move on to our next tip here. And so on this tip, I'm going to be talking to you all about templates. And templates can, in my mind, can be kind of a catch-22. So when you first get started, they can be very good to work off from and getting you familiar with how Power Apps work, because it can give you a fully functioning app in seconds. And so it can be very helpful when you get started to use one of these templates, get a better understanding how Power Apps works, how like simple formulas work. You can dig into them more and see exactly like how they're worded and structured in different screens and layouts. There's a lot of different options. Last time I checked, I believe there were around 30-ish templates. And what's also great about using templates, as I said in the previous tip, when you're starting, I want you to focus on UX over UI. And what's good about using a template, it's already got a layout and it's design prepped for you and spits it out for you. So it gives you an opportunity to just work on the functionality or the UX of the app. So I highly recommend when you get started to use these templates. And also another good thing about templates is it can give you ideas for maybe how to design other apps you've already started, or maybe even give you entire ideas for an app to make from scratch. So I find that also to be beneficial. And also one other cool thing about templates is creating your own template. And there isn't a way in Power Apps where you can literally like create your own like template and have it be labeled as template within Power Apps. But what you can do is, let's say I'm creating an app for a company to submit field investigations for workers who may not have service. So I start building this app and I realize it's a pretty great app and I can reutilize this for other use cases. So what I've done in the past is I've stripped that app down. Well, first I save a copy, and what I do is I give a prefix to that new app called template. So I know that app is a template app, one of my custom templates. And so what I'll do is in that template app, I'll go in and remove any branding, anything that's company specific, and kind of tear it down to the bones where it's just functionality. So if I encounter another use case where I can utilize that app, I can save myself time by utilizing one of my custom templates and just working off of that. So I feel like that could be very beneficial for you to give a shot. Again, it might take time to get to that point, but I mean, we're beginners here, so there's nothing wrong with starting with the template. But also, what I was going to mention about it being kind of a catch-22. When you get more experience and you're still trying to use templates, you can sometimes find yourself changing that template so much where it makes sense that you should just started from blank to begin with. So I find it saves time eventually to start creating from blank. And I've actually seen a lot of companies prefer that their Power Apps developers can create from blank right out the gate. I've actually been in a couple interviews before where they asked, or where they said the first thing I'd be asked to do would be to create an app from blank. So again, start with templates, but I recommend working towards creating from blank. And so what I'm going to do here is I'm going to leave my app again. And so up here underneath home is this create. And so right here, if you scroll down, you have all these templates you can choose from that can give you a good starting point for an app you want to do. And you may not have a certain idea of an app you want to make right now, but you can come in here and mess around with these and they may give you ideas or give you experience with working with a fully functioning app. But also, if you look up here at the top, you have the option to get started from data. And this can be very helpful. So you see data for SharePoint, Excel, and SQL. So you could click on one of these and then connect it to a data source, and then that would in turn spit out a template that is already connected and functioning using the data source you connected to. So this is also a very good starting point if you're looking to use a template and you want to just cut out that step of having to add data. You can just do get started with data here, but you have a little less. I believe all these will spit out like a 3-page app for you. It's fairly standard. But again, more simple things like that can be very helpful when you're getting started. All right, so I'm going to come back over here to my budgeting app. Hopefully, load. There we go. And when I'm clicking over it, it just knows that a session is open in another window. And so you just need to override it sometimes. And so back to my PowerPoint. So we just learned about templates. All right, so next up, I'm going to talk about the F5 and the Alt key. And so what these two things do is they help you troubleshoot your app very quickly. And so actually, I'm just going to switch right back over to Power Apps. And so to give a quick example, so what these two things do is help you preview your app in different ways. So if you come up here to the top right and hit this little play icon, it puts you in preview mode. So your app will interact or will work as though it's live. So all these buttons will work as though it was being operated from a phone or whatever format you have it in. And then you would come up here to the X to come back out of it. But for me, especially when it comes to troubleshooting maybe an error or just playing around with the design, and I want to see what it looks like and play and preview, it's very annoying to have to come up here and just play and come back at the X and all that, and also being slightly visually impaired. I know that this button here is not very accessible with the color contrast. So what I do is I utilize the F5 key, and I have a mouse that enables me to program buttons on here. So what I do is have one of my buttons on my mouse equal F5. So whenever I click this button, it just pops me in and out of preview mode. So I find this to be very, very helpful when it comes to troubleshooting errors or design or whatever it may be, or just getting a quick look at your app. But also one of the cool things you can do is using the Alt key. Now what the Alt key will do is not put you in preview mode. So if I hover over this button down here in preview mode, you can see that it turns green. In edit mode, it does not, because it allows me to click on it, change properties, and change code. It allows me to edit this button. But while hovering over it, if I press the Alt key, you notice how it turns green. However, I am still in edit mode. So when you hold down the Alt key, then whatever your cursor is interacting with, that element in your app will act as though you're in live mode. So if I click on this button without the Alt key, it just selects that element. But if I click it while holding Alt, it will take me to this screen. And so I find this very helpful as well. It's just preference of what you would like to use. Like, for instance, if you have a mouse that doesn't have reprogrammable buttons, it may be easier to use the Alt key instead of going up here or hitting F5. But for me, I prefer to just hit F5 and pop right in and out of preview mode. So I find that to be very beneficial for testing in a variety of purposes. So I recommend trying it out and seeing how it can assist you in your development process. All right, so with that, I'm going to switch back over here to my PowerPoint and move on to the next slide. And this one is one of my favorite tips for you guys, and this is on alignment in Power Apps. And before I move on, can I get a time check, Malcolm?
You can. We are we got about 7 minutes to the top of the hour, but we didn't start until close to 1:30. So you got lots of time. Take your time.
All righty. Sounds good. All right, so alignment is this one of my favorite tips for you guys, because when I first got started with Power Apps, I found this to be very challenging. And say maybe you have a lot of experience in PowerPoint or some other software that has a similar style. So it may not be as much of an issue for you as it was for me, but I still want to show it to you guys because I had good feedback when I gave this tip at a conference. So I'm going to show it to you guys. So right over here, I filtered this down. So I'm going to go to this demo screen. And so right here, I have a label, a text label on the screen. So a text label and a text input are different. A text label, you can't interact with the text when you're in preview mode or when you're using the app. But a text input is where you want the user to input data. So right here, we just have a label just to look at. But if I go into edit mode, and so before I demonstrate this, I just want to say there are two different forms of alignment. You can align the entire element, this entire text label in the screen, and you can also align the text that is within this element. So first, and there are also two different ways to do both types. So first, I will show you the two ways that you can align. Clear out this filter. First, show you the two ways that you can align this element. So when you select an element on a screen, it will light up here over here in the tree view. And you'll see it down here. It's called right here. And so when you have it selected, I'm not a fan of this. I wish it was more accessible. When you click an element, it highlights it, but it's extremely light and very similar to the rest of the colors. But it's been like that ever since I've used Power Apps, but I wish they would fix that, but maybe at some point. But either way. So alignment, the first way to align the element in the screen, you can come over here in the tree view, right click, go to align, and I'm going to align this to left. And if you watch the box, it aligns to the left side of the screen. So that's the one way, or the first way you can align the element. And the second way is the way that I prefer, and that's just to right click the element, go to align, and I'm going to align it back to center. I find that much easier than going over here because for the reason I told you, this isn't as accessible than that. So that's the two ways to align the element in the screen, but then you have two ways that you can align the text that is within this element. So you don't need to double click to highlight the text. You can just click and make sure the element is selected. And so the first way is coming up to the top of the screen here. Oh, wrong button there. Click on the element and come up here to the top of the screen. And you can do align left and watch only the text moves this time. So that's the first way that you can align the text. And then the second way is by having the element selected over here on the right-hand side in the properties pane. You can see that align left is highlighted. And so I'm going to want to move it back to align center and see the text move back to center. So that may or may not be as helpful to you as it was to me, but if I'm able to save one person the frustration I went through learning that and dealing with that, then I'll take it because that was quite frustrating when I first got started. And so one other thing about alignment, there is something called distribute. And what distribute does is I'm going to demo it here for you. So right here, the button's going to take me to another screen. And right now, you can see all these rectangles are oddly spaced and doesn't look very visually appealing. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to use the ability to distribute elements to make this into a nice looking pattern. So what you would do is you would do control clicks while holding control and clicking elements, it allows you to select multiple elements at one time. So I'm going to go through here and select all of these horizontal yellow rectangles. And once you have them all selected, you can right click, go to the align, and then over here and at the bottom, you'll see two options for distribute. You see distribute horizontally and distribute vertically. So these bars are going horizontally across the screen. However, I want them to distribute going up and down on the screen. So I'm going to do distribute vertically and keep an eye on the bars. And now they're evenly spaced from the bottom to the top. And now I'm going to do that same process doing the control clicks with these vertical purple bars. And now I don't know if you noticed, but I tried to keep the color scheme similar to Doug colors. Not quite as accurate, but it'll do. All right, so these I want to distribute horizontally. By doing that, it made that once chaotic pattern down to a very, in my opinion, pretty and even pattern by using the distribute function. All right, so hopefully you find that helpful. I find that to be a very helpful tip when it comes to design. Because I tend to be a little bit OCD when it comes to design in my app, so I want things to be like perfectly evenly spaced between each other, and I find that better for accessibility standards as well. So I highly suggest utilizing those features in Power Apps. All right, so with that, I'm gonna switch back over to my PowerPoint here. So we're gonna move on to my next one. And this one is a more conceptual tip for you all, not a demo tip. So this is going to be visualizing your app. And what I mean by this is before you even create your app to get started, visualize what you want your app to do, like the function of the app. What's that going to be? What do you want it to look like? Do you have any specific company branding you want to align with? How many screens do you want? Like all of these things you can think of and visualize in your head, and it might be even helpful to take a few notes here and there. I wouldn't suggest getting too descriptive in your notes, just maybe how many screens do you want, what's the color scheme, and things like that. So I find it very helpful to visualize your app before you create it, because oftentimes I've just gotten ahead of myself and jumped right in and started developing and realized, oh, I need to change that. And so I went back and had to backtrack and change things that could have been avoided if I had more forethought. So I highly suggest you think about your app. What do you want it to do? The design you want before you start developing. I find it to be very helpful and time saving, because a lot of times you may have to go back and change things around to fit a certain style that at that point you wanted your app to have. All right, so let's see, is there anything else on? Oh, and also one more thing on this is keeping in mind the demographic of users you're going to have for this app. So whether it's going to be male, female, labor workers, people with disabilities, whoever it may be, that group of people may have certain needs that need to be fulfilled by your app. Like, for instance, if you're developing an app and someone tells you, so like, hey, I have a few people on my team that have dyslexia, you're going to want to take that into account when it comes to designing your app. So you don't want to design your app and then be like, oh, I need to make those accommodations and then have to go back and reformat things. So keeping those things in mind on the front end can save you a lot of time on the back end. All right, so with that, hopefully you find that helpful as well. Let's see what my next tip I have for you here. And this one's going to be giving descriptive names to your elements. So I briefly talked, do I want to go ahead and switch over to Power Apps? Yeah, might as well. All right, so over here in Power Apps, I showed you here. I'll go back to the main screen here. Filter that back down. All right, so over here on the left-hand side, you see how I have all these elements. And as you can see, a lot of these have very descriptive names. And I do that on purpose for various reasons. One, the biggest reason for me is when you're writing code, Power Apps in the Power Platform is known as low code, no code. However, if you're wanting to make more advanced apps, you're going to need to know how to write some code. And so what I suggest is getting in the habit of giving descriptive names to your elements. And the main reason for that, when it comes time to writing formulas, you're going to have to reference different elements in your formula. So for instance, if I'm going to be patching something that the user is typing in to my data source, so sending it to my data source, I'm going to need to reference that text input or that text field in the formula. But if I have 10, 15, 30 different text inputs that a user can type into, I'm going to have no idea which one I need to include in my formula. I'm going to have to do like, to go find the certain field and click on it and then find the name over here and then try to remember it while you're typing the formula. But if you know that that text field is that user's email, then I would do txt user email or txt email. And what you'll also notice is I tend to follow a naming convention. And for me, I'll use like prefixes like LBL for label, TXT for text input. Some things I won't use prefix for. I'll just write out button or an image. So having a naming convention can really help you, because if you're bouncing around calling some things LBL or some things TXT and then sometimes writing out text, it can get a little confusing when writing code. So I recommend when you find a naming convention that you like, then stick to it and get in the habit of using it consistently. And you do not have to follow the one I'm using. That's just what I found helps me. If you find one that works better for you, then that's all that matters, then use that. And the one thing is, I will say about this, as you'll see, I think I have almost every, if not every element named something, maybe not. But you see, like right here, I have this one just called rectangle 2 or 3, yeah, 2. So like rectangles, labels, like things you're not going to be referencing in formulas, you don't need to name them. So like say like an image, if I have an image on the screen that's just going to be there to look at, it's not going to have any interactive quality, then you don't need to worry about renaming those things. You can if you want to, but it's not required. And also I suggest naming it as soon as you add something to the screen, because let's say I just added all these elements and then I was like, oh, I really should rename all these elements. No one's going to want to do that because it's way too time consuming. So doing it right when you add the element to the screen can save you a lot of time and frustration down the road. All right, and one other thing, did I already cover it? All right. I think actually I'll touch a little bit more on this later when referring to accessibility, so I won't cover that right here. All right, so I'm going to switch back over here to my PowerPoint and go to my next slide here. This one is also a little unique tip, but also very simple. And so with the navigate function is the first and most important formula for you to learn, and function in PowerFX for you to learn. And you're going to need it if you have an app with more than one screen. You're going to need this. If you have an app with one screen, you're not going to need it because you don't need a user to navigate to any other screen because you have none. But if you have a screen with an app with at least 2 screens, you're going to need to utilize this function. So if you have more than one, you're going to need it. And also what's interesting is I think everything, at least everything up until now in my experience, every element that I have used has had an onSelect property. And I'll show you what that means in a moment if you're not aware yet. So I'll go ahead and switch over to Power Apps. And so here, let me filter down this tree view again. So I'm going to be showing you navigate. So right here, I have a couple of things on the screen. Right here on the left, I have an icon, which can work just the same as a button like I have over here. But as I said, you can have like almost everything I've experienced in Power Apps has an onSelect property. And what that is, if I select this icon right here, automatically, it'll select, there we go. Automatically it defaults up here to the onSelect property. And so what this property is, basically you would put in here what you want this button to do when it's selected. So on select, what do you want this button to do? So that's what you would put up here, but I can put on an image an onSelect property. And so whenever a user clicks on the image, it takes them to a different screen or does something. So onSelect and onSelect properties can be very, very versatile in how you use them. But that's, once you get more experience, you can get more creative in how you leverage the navigate and the onSelect property. Right now, I'm just going to be showing you how you can navigate to different screens. So first up here, let me move the highlight out of the way so it doesn't distract anything. So first, I'm going to navigate. So whenever something pops up, it's like the top suggestion, you can just go ahead and hit tab and it'll automatically populate that function. And so it's always going to, a function is always going to begin with an open parenthesis. And so what it wants here is its first parameter. The navigate function it requires at least one parameter. And so the parameter it requires is a screen name. And so I'm going to have it, what screen do I want it to go to? I'm going to have it go back to the main screen. So I put in a screen, and so I could close this off right here. And as you can see, when a formula is incomplete or has an error, you see that red X. When I close off that parenthesis, it goes away, meaning everything is, there's no errors in that code. So if I go into preview mode and I click on this button, it should take me back to the home screen. And it did. All right, so now if we go back to the navigate screen, and now I'm going to go over here to this button, and I'm going to add another navigate. I'm going to add another formula to this one. All right, so I'm also going to do navigate here. It's the first one, so I'm going to pop it in there. And then the one I want to go to is at the top again, so I'm going to hit tab. So that's the first parameter, but if you, as I said, if you hit that parenthesis, it goes away. But I'm going to add a second parameter, and this parameter is optional. But what you can do is our screen transitions. Apologies for my slow typing. But with screen transitions, I believe you have 5, not including none, because that's not really a transition. Yes, you have 5, essentially 6 options to choose from. And so you have uncover, uncover right, cover, cover right, and fade. And so if you have experience in PowerPoint, you probably recognize these. And so I'll just do cover. And so again, that's the second parameter, but that's an optional parameter. And so what I can do is I can close that parenthesis and it will go away, and now this button will work. But also there is one other parameter that you can use in the navigate function. So I'm going to delete that close parenthesis and add another comma. So you can add one more parameter here. And the parameter you can add is setting a new value to a variable or updating a variable. And variable is a much more advanced topic, and perhaps it's something I really enjoy using. They can be kind of stressful and frustrating to understand at first, but once you understand how they work and like some of the tiny quirks about them, they can be extremely valuable to know how to use. But I actually don't have any variables in this demo app, so I'm not going to be setting any variable. But if at some point in the future I want to have a session on, get rid of that comma, that's why the error did not go away. But in the future, if any of y'all would want to see a session on variables, I feel like I could make a whole session on it because they're just very entertaining and very interesting to learn about. So now if I go into preview mode and click on this button, it takes me to my variable screen. And it has a little option down here to leave a rating for this session. So did I enjoy it? Absolutely. But I guess I don't really have a choice there. So I'm just going to leave it on absolutely. And so with that, I'm going to switch back over to my PowerPoint here. And now we have the Q&A portion, but also if we have more time and you guys would like a couple more tips, I have some more. But if you guys have any questions for me, I'm more than willing to move on to that portion now.
So there weren't any that popped up in the chat throughout, but if folks have questions and are curious about any other tips or things that Taylor covered that you want to maybe slide back to and look over, now's the time.
With that, I'll go ahead and move to this screen. So there's my email down at the bottom left, and also there's a QR code there with an optional survey if you want to fill it out. Like your name and email is not required. Just if you have any thoughts you want to share, feel free to fill out that survey.
A couple comments in the chat. So I see Sean has his hand up with a question. There was another comment in here. Thanks for all the great tips, great information, a ton of things I did not know. I share that sentiment as well personally, because there was, as somebody who doesn't work a ton in Power Apps, I just kind of dabble in it here and there. It was good to get a refresher on some things, but definitely some brand new content that I was like, wait, you can do what? So that was awesome. Sean, great. You have your question up. You have your question up. You have your question up with a hand.
Yeah, right. Thanks, Sarah. That was great. And I especially noticed you highlighted the importance of kind of like naming conventions. If we get an app that someone else kind of started and they maybe not necessarily didn't follow that, and then you have a bunch of like labels, buttons, screen, it's super unclear. Is there an easy way to like edit all that in some other area, or are you just kind of stuck having to manually click into there and then change the names?
That question was a little hard to follow. Your audio is cutting low in now. Did you pick that up, Malcolm?
It was essentially, if I got the gist of it, Sean, if you're inheriting an app and they haven't taken your tips to heart and done some, been really directive around the naming conventions and things like that. So it's really hard taking on somebody else's app and understanding what everything means. Is there an easy way to kind of update all of that at once, or do you have to kind of go through one by one and kind of figure out what each component is?
Gotcha.
Hopefully I'm doing that justice.
Is that what you were asking, Sean?
Exactly.
All right. Yeah. Unfortunately, there isn't a way that you can. That's actually a good idea for maybe Microsoft to add like a naming convention in the app that you can choose to have for your elements. But for me, in my experience, no, unfortunately, you'll have to do all that yourself. But actually, if I can switch back over to Power Apps, like as you saw, let me go back to the. And which screen was it? It was the main screen. All right, so let me hold on, clear that the filter. All right, so all these elements. So essentially, you're saying if you inherit an app and all these have the default names like text input 1 through like 30 and label and very inaccessible names and can make it kind of confusing. Unfortunately, there isn't a way that you can change all those, add a naming convention. You have to go in and do that yourself. The easiest way that I've known, if it's not very clear which elements correspond with which name, is actually clicking the element in the canvas. And as you can see, it will highlight over here. So now you know, all right, this one corresponds to this button. So what does this button do? It navigates to the expense screen. So I'm going to rename this highlighted one. I'm going to rename it button and then view all expenses. So unfortunately, there isn't a way to go through and have all of them renamed for you. It is a tedious process. That's why I suggest doing it as you're adding your elements. So even you yourself, by the time you add 20 elements, you're like, oh, no, you have to go rename all those. I'll just skip it. So that's why I recommend starting off by doing that. So if someone else is working on your app later down the road, they don't encounter that issue.
Good call. Very good call. There's another, I see another hand up. Vivek, your hand is up.
Yeah, so just continuing with the same question. So if say we have one of the component here, button view all, this particular component might be, it is possible that it is used in some calculation like function and all. So if we change a name of the button view all, does automatically all calculation changes?
Great question.
Do you mean like, does the name of your elements change in the code?
Yeah. If I
Yeah,
have
that
used
is.
that.
Yeah, that is one of the good things about power-ups. Let's say I had all default names for my elements and I had a lot of references to these elements in formulas. If you rename them over here, power-ups is smart and will rename them in your code. Is that what you were asking?
Yeah.
All
Thank
right.
you.
Yeah. So luckily, power-ups does have that working very well.
I have a question, Taylor, if I don't see any other hands up. So what do you have in terms of recommendations for collecting requirements? So you talked a little bit about visualizing the app, which I thought was great, because I've thought of that before too. You like take some time to actually think about what it is you're trying to do and think about the end state and everything. What do you have any tips for people in terms of how they require or start gather requirements or just document, or when you say visualize it, how are you kind of documenting your plan? Are you sketching things out, or are you using an application for that of some sort, or are you quite literally just sort of thinking it through and doing it in the air and then try and execute it?
So you mean like kind of compiling like solution requirements from the customer or planning the app itself?
Yes, sort of, but I think more so, I guess more so the latter. So planning the app. So when you're visualizing and saying, okay, I know I'm going to need a couple of screens. I know I need a screen for this. I know I screen for that. I want, when I click this thing, for it to go to this thank you screen, and then after 3 seconds revert back. Any tips on how you document that in a way?
Yeah, that's a good question. So when you're meeting with customer, you're going to gather these solution requirements, and I would recommend recording those calls so you can refer back to it, because if you miss something and the client's like, where's this? You don't want to say, I forgot. So I certainly would recommend recording that call if you have permission to. And then what I'll do is I'll rewatch that recording, because when I'm in the call, I'm focusing on listening to them. I'm not worrying about taking notes. I'll rewatch that meeting, then take notes. And you can do that on your phone or using Word or whatever you want, or in a draft email. But just having that down and saying like, how many screens do they want? Like, who's like, what are the users going to be doing with this app? Like, what's the function? Once you have all those things mapped out, what I will do sometimes is then put that in ChatGPT and have it and ask it to make a checklist for me. So then it will organize it where it's like, all right, on screen one, the client wants this, this, and this. And then so as you're making the app, you can be like, all right, I'm on screen 1, and then look on your other monitor and be like, all right, they want this, this, and this on screen 1. So ChatGPT can be very helpful when it comes to organization when developing your app. Hopefully that answered it pretty well.
It does, yeah, and I appreciate that. It's funny that you mentioned that because I just started dabbling a little bit with taking a meeting transcript. So yes, record it, but also then take the transcript, which it gets mostly right most of the time it seems, and taking that transcript and putting it through ChatGPT. Now, just a little asterisk on that, if you're thinking of doing that, especially if you're dealing with client requirements, you're going to be wanting to use a enterprise version, right? You don't want the data you're putting in there to be training the global models. You want it to not be using your submissions for that. So just a caveat to make sure you're using a paid version that protects your data, because you don't want to be throwing customers' data out there. But it works really well. Like, I was really impressed. I had to break a transcript into like 4 chunks because it was a long meeting, but then putting it through and ultimately got it to this really quite great synthesized version of the notes that in bullet form that did a great job taking a 90 some odd minute meeting and compartmentalizing it into a handful of takeaways, which was really cool. So I love that idea, because getting it to give you a list, I'd be like, okay, everything they talked about in screen 1, summarize that for me and show me what I need to do. That's awesome. Good call.
Can you hold on for 1 second? I'm gonna unpair and repair my speaker real quick. Or is that just
Yep.
on my end, or are people cutting out for others as well?
We can hear you okay.
All right, at least y'all can hear
and
me.
I heard
So
somebody
y'all weren't
else's
lost half the time. That's good.
Yeah, Sean.
But
No, you're good. Sean cut in and out a little bit, so it might be your speakers, but others have sounded fine. So
I'm gonna unconnect real quick, so I'll be back in a moment.
so while we're waiting for Taylor to reconnect, if there's any other questions, just throw them in the chat or chime in.
DIY RSL HPTOP and Taylor's iPhone.
All right, hello.
Were you back? Sound better now?
All right, you sound a little better now. I think that
Awesome.
may have just been a speaker issue for me.
Fair enough. Well, while you were reconnecting, I asked if there's any other questions. I don't see any other hands, and I don't see any other chat items in here. But Taylor, that was an awesome overview. That was great. Again, selfishly for me, as somebody who doesn't dabble in Power Apps a ton, it was really good to get that kind of refresher on some of those features. So thank you for taking time to put this together and to present it to us today. Any other
Absolutely
items? Oh, I lied. I see another hand. Vivek, your hand's back up.
Yes, so we are towards the end, and I would like to invite all of you, either as a speaker, either as a attendee. I'm organizing event on February 24th, Power Platform Bootcamp in Toronto, in person at Microsoft, and call for speaker is up. Main, it is related to Power Platform. So Power Platform topics are more than welcome. We have already very good attendance, 150 almost register, and we still have few more days. I'm putting that link in chat window. If any of you are ready to share your knowledge, much appreciated. So I already put the link in, and we are organizing this on the same day all over the world, around 102 locations already organizing this on the same day.
Awesome. Awesome. Yeah, please do throw that in the chat. I see it there. So if anybody's interested in participating in that or submitting sessions, please do. That'd be great. Awesome. Any other parting comments? Any other tips from anybody else, roundtable style? If anybody else has tips for Power Apps related things, hacks that you've benefit from or use, feel free to share now. Going once, twice.
I mean, if you're looking for more, I can throw out a couple more tips, but
well, we're at a good breaking point, but maybe if you have a part 2, maybe we can definitely chat about that, Taylor, and see if there is a second session we could do down the road, because we're always looking for new ideas. on that note, if anybody is interested, I put the link much earlier in the chat for upcoming or for your ideas. If you have one, I already have one submission from today, which is awesome, and I followed up. If you have sessions you'd like to present or content you'd like to see, and we can try and find people to speak to it, please feel free to throw that into the chat or email me directly. You can find me on LinkedIn, and we would be happy to try and find somebody to address those things, or better yet, have you speak at the event. So thanks everybody for joining us. Taylor, thank you again so much for taking time to put this together and for coming out today and sharing all your knowledge and insights. And I look forward to seeing you at DynamicsCon Live in a couple months. Not next
certainly.
month, May.
Yeah. Yeah, I confuse like the conferences at times, like I'll mess up the days, but thank you so much for inviting me. I love to have the opportunity to do more public speaking and network, and these are great opportunities. So appreciate the invite, and thank you all for listening, and hope you walked away with something new. So
Absolutely. Yep. Great tips, Taylor. All right, everybody. Thanks so much for coming out. Enjoy the rest of your week and have a great weekend. I wish you no snow.
Thank you,
Unless you
Taylor.
want it.
thank you,
Take care,
Vivek.
everybody.